We're getting
Okay.
in there, good.
Hello.
All right, well, welcome back, everyone, and we've got a couple of folks in from the Agency of Ag, Food and Markets to introduce themselves and take us through lunch hour. So we've got Abby Willard and Glenn Evans, and if you two would like to just tell us briefly who you are, then we'll go around the table and then we'll let you begin.
Sounds great. So I'm Abby Willard. I'm the Director of the Ag Development Division at the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. It's nice to meet some of you for the first time and see some of you again. Some familiar faces.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Glenn Evans. I'm the director for the Vermont Agriculture and Environmental Laboratory. So our facility is located in Randolph Center.
Let's see. Well, I'll start and then we'll go around this way. I'm David Durfee. I represent Shaftesbury, Glastonbury, and Sunderland, Bennington 3 district.
Rodney Graham, represent Orange 3, which is Williamstown and Chelsea.
Jed Lipsky, Memorial 1, Stout.
Henry Pearl, I represent Danville, Cabot, and Peachum.
Charles Wilson, Caledonia 3, Wheelock, Sheffield, Sutton, Newark, and Linden.
Josie Levitt, Grandel Chittenden, all of Grandel County, and West Milton.
Mike Rice, Bennington, Rutland, District Danby, Dorset, Landgrove, Mount Tabor, and Peru.
John O'Brien, Royalton, and Tunbridge.
Esme Cole, Hartford.
Good.
Wonderful to meet you all.
I just have a question that might help us because it took me like 3 sessions before I heard it. AAFM, right, has
Yep.
6 divisions.
Correct.
You're the heads of 2. So could you just, in a couple sentences, just describe what each of those buckets are?
Yeah. Oh, gosh, I'll do my best.
It's a good test.
Yeah, this is a good test. So the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets has 6 divisions. So administration, ag development, the lab, so VALE, the farm division, which is public health and ag resource management, food safety, consumer protection, and water quality, or ag water quality. So each of those 6 divisions plays a different role in supporting agriculture in the food system. We'll talk about our 2 in greater detail, but the administration division is where our business office, our legal counsel, Diane Bothfeld used to be the director of that, and she's just here retiring on her last few days. And Nicole Dubuque is the new director of administrative services for that division. In the water quality division, you'll hear from that division if you haven't already. They do all of the ag water quality permitting, the LFO, MFO, and small farm operation permits, as well as a lot of conservation funding. I should say out of the administration division is also where the climate team and some of the land use activities also happen. In the farm division, so public health and ag resource management is another kind of regulatory division that's responsible for feed, seed, and fertilizer and pesticides, our apiary, honey inspections. What else am I missing from the farm division?
Weights and measures?
Weights and measures is in the food safety consumer protection division. So that's the final division that does our meat inspection, meat slaughter and processing inspection, our dairy inspection, our animal health, so live animal inspection, invasive pests and diseases happen out of, well, actually some of the pests happen out of the farm division when you're talking about, ticks and other of those, but other pests then in the food safety consumer protection division would be like pandemic, epidemic type diseases, and weights and measures is also in food safety consumer protection. And then in the ag development division, just really briefly, and then we can go into our presentation. So we do the marketing and promotion, a lot of granting out of the ag development division, sort of promoting Vermont businesses and Vermont products. And then briefly on VALE, just round it out.
And so with VALE, we're looking at trying to support the analytical testing needs of the state, and predominantly that's through the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, as well as the Agency of Natural Resources. So this is everything and anything from dairy products all the way through to pesticide enforcement cases, to water quality, to pet food analysis, you name it. We get involved in terms of trying to provide the data to inform programs.
So most of the regulatory programs are within the farm, the consumer protection, and water quality. And then admin, the lab, and ag development are sort of the supporting ancillary sections of the agency.
Wait, what's dairy in?
Dairy inspection is in food safety, consumer protection.
Like EB Florida?
Yes, so EB's team that does all the dairy inspections is in that division. And we are sort of a unique agency in that we don't have departments and we don't have commissioners based on our size. So we're like 140 some odd employees. And so we go right from a secretary and a deputy secretary to the 6 divisions. And so as division directors, we play kind of that commissioner role, but not as an appointed position.
Great. Well, we may have something to look at, a presentation.
Yeah, I think we both have a few slides that Alora may have. Did you guys connect with audio, do you think?
Alora can hear us, so.
Okay, great. Hi, Alora.
Alora, if you
We're in
are.
our documents too.
Oh, good, you did receive them. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we can all check on our committee page for the documents and then maybe we'll have them up on the screen, but let's pull them up.
Yeah, so which would you like to hear from first? And we can see which, if it does work to put the presentation up, that may be helpful, but.
Okay, yeah, why don't we start with you?
Okay, I'm happy to start with the ag development. So if you guys find your ag development division slides, is everybody able to see something or should I wait a moment for Laura? It does have some of the stats that I was, oh, great, look, she's pulling it up.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, there we are, good. So the Agriculture Development Division, we're a 21 staff team. I joined the Ag Development Division in 2011. So at that time we were 5 staff and probably had 4 or 5 programs. And so over the last decade, we've seen significant amount of growth in ag development. So we now have 21 staff and we probably manage a dozen or more programs. And that kind of growth is really in response to bringing in a lot of federal resources into the state of Vermont and a variety of state appropriations that you all have and your predecessors have been responsible for in bringing resources to the agency that's focused on grant making, so getting dollars out the door to businesses and service providers, marketing Vermont products and Vermont businesses, engaging in more collaboration with the ultimate objective of connecting businesses and communities to critical resources. So that could be grants or business assistance, marketing support, regulatory guidance, and always economic development opportunities. So looking for new markets, looking at new product opportunities, looking for new partnerships. So that's sort of how we function and who we generally are as a division. We can go to the next slide, if that works. Some of the core functions that we play would be, we have established programs that we manage, and this is sort of showing some of the investments that happened last fiscal year in FY22. We also bring in a lot of, as I said, federal resources into Vermont and into the agency. We've worked and provide a lot of assistance recently around meat slaughter and processing, around dairy innovation, looking at supply chain opportunities around aggregation, storage, and distribution. And then looking at and planning for food security and food security assistance, especially in the last 3 years during the pandemic. We have staff that sit on the Future of Ag Commission group and advise that. We guide the Dairy Task Force, the Mass Feeding Group, our Farm to School Network. So we also play a really public role in the Ag and Food System Network. We work with Farm to Plate. So when you heard about the Ag and Food System Strategic Plan from Ellen and Jake, that was something that our division worked with that team on for, the 12 to 18 months it took to put that plan together. And then we also often play the role of obligating state appropriations. So a lot of the new initiatives that come through this committee and others and make it through the legislative process often fall within the Ag Development Division of starting up a new program or expanding an established program. We're a very nimble and flexible division, and that's really sort of how we're functioning. So yes, please.
Just wanted, did you have more on this slide before?
Really quickly, I just wanted to note, and just speaking to growth, so since 2012, there's been about 1,400 recipients, so businesses, service providers that have received grants or contracts from our division totaling over $20 million in awards. So that gives you a scope of kind of the work that we've done over the past 10 years. But to also speak to the huge development efforts that have happened in the last year, in FY22, we obligated over $10.4 million, which is what you can see kind of represented by those dozen or so programs. In FY20, so prior to the pandemic, we put out $2.2 million in funds. So just the amount of resources and opportunities that our division is responsible for is pretty exponential in the last few years.
And I was going to ask about the working lands line in particular. That and it sounds like it's not just that particular program, but others were particularly large in the FY22. Can you just speak to the one-timeness of that, I guess? So we've had a couple of conversations about working lands even today, and we're going to be hearing more in the coming weeks from your staff, I think, about drilling down a little bit into that program. But what can you just say what that number has looked like, or sort of refresh our memories?
Sure.
Other years.
Yeah, and the next slide actually talks specifically about the Working Lands program, but the funding for Working Lands has fluctuated over time based upon our allocation and maybe actually, Laura, it makes sense to go to the next slide and we can talk specifically about Working Lands and what that program aims to achieve. So the Working Lands program's objective is making these catalytic investments in ag and forestry, and sort of it's a really exciting opportunity when the legislature passed the concept of having agriculture and forestry considered as working land partners in parallel. So it created that wonderful opportunity for Agency of Commerce, Community Development, Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, and Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation to collaborate on making these critical investments in the working landscape that sort of help businesses and communities sustain ongoing support. Laura, I don't know if you're able to advance to the next slide. Thank you. So this sort of shows just in the last 2 years the impact of the investments, which we could start with by saying to date, we've funded over 418 projects, distributing over $13.6 million in the program, which then leveraged an additional $23 million. So that's another benefit of the Working Lands program, is that businesses and applicants generally bring some sort of match to their projects, which demonstrates kind of the leveraging potential of the state appropriation of Working Lands funds. And then we also, every year following the completion of a grant, and then 2 years following a completion of a Working Lands grant, we survey grantees to talk about the impact that the grant funds had upon their business. And so we ask them questions around the job creation or retention that they've experienced, the acres that came under production or remained in production, and what sales they could directly attribute to this Working Lands business's project. So the advancement that they made, the diversification, the expansion. And so the last statistic set there just sort of speaks to what businesses report to us as the, growth in economic impact of their project on their business and on the ag sector. So over $55 million in new sales, 539 new jobs, the direct employment of over 1,100 people, and the direct management of over 24,000 acres. So that's kind of the program overall. Alora, the next slide, if you don't mind, this speaks to the appropriations that you were just asking about, Chair Durfee, over the last few years. So in FY '22, the appropriation was 5.3 million, which included some one-time. In FY '23, we had a $1 million base and 2 million of ARPA awards. And then, as we all have just recently heard in the governor's proposed budget for FY '24, 4 million. So that would be a 1 million base and then 3 million of one time. Prior to FY '22, our base allocation was typically just under $600,000. In FY '21, I believe we also had a base allocation of $1 million. And then prior to that, FY '20, we would have been at $594,000, I think is what the program had as a base allocation.
Thank you. Representative Rice had a question, I think.
Yeah, just wondering if you could speak to, of that 10.4 million in FY '22, how much of that is federal money that's being facilitated versus actually state?
That's a great question that I don't know that I've dug that difference out yet.
Okay. Or more generally.
I would say a majority of it is federal funds. In the FY '22, the big appropriations that we had were within the Working Lands Program and within the the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center, which is all federal funding. Our specialty crop block grant funding is federal. I'm trying to think of the other programs that are listed on there that would be all federal.
LFPA is federal, right?
Yeah, the local food purchase assistance funds is also federal resources.
And sorry, just follow
Yeah,
on.
sure.
Is there an anticipation of, like, these numbers, the 186 in specialty crops, 253 in LFPA, is that sort of where they'll be moving forward, or are those numbers also sort of inflated?
Specialty crop block is not inflated. It's actually kind of an annual appropriation of a block grant, which is like a really wonderful model of like annual funds come to the agency in a block grant that then we disperse to the specialty crop community. So we've had that program for, a decade. And it's actually, the allocation has kind of crept up over time. It's all calculated by a formula across the country based upon sales of specialty crop products. Anyway, they get calculated by USDA each year. So I think our allocation this year is like $330,000, so slight increase. LFPA, which we can talk about, is this local food purchase assistance program from USDA. We've just received a second $500,000, so we actually have just over $1 million in that program. And that program is about serving underserved populations, food produced by marginalized agricultural producers. So it's a very specific kind of program developed by USDA that we are kind of managing and then implementing here in Vermont. So I don't anticipate that we're going to have those funds every year forever. We may have them for another year. We didn't even know that we were going to get the second $519,000 until a few weeks ago. So that's part of the challenge for the Ag Development Division is and opportunity, I guess, is taking advantage of when there's excitement around a particular need, whether it's in the maple industry or marketing or dairy. The Dairy Business Innovation Center funds, for example, we have $38.77 million in that program, and that'll all go away in 2026, presumably. But, huge opportunity for investment in Vermont's dairy industry, over this time period. And so we do our best to take advantage of those resources, kind of staff up when we can with limited service positions, adjust scopes of work to kind of prioritize where there's interest and resources at the time.
Representative Levitt.
I just had a quick question. You created over 500 new jobs.
The businesses, yes.
And are those jobs going to stay, or were they just created because they got the money and then have those jobs going away? How sustainable are those jobs?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Those metrics get captured as part of our results-based accountability to the administration every year. And so the Working Lands Program and that particular metric is something that we track every year. And so again, I don't have that data memorized or in front of me, but my recollection is that we're showing a growth in jobs year over year as a result of working land business investments.
I mean, it makes sense. I just wanted to, okay, cool.
I mean, again, I will admit, I think there are circumstances where certain businesses either retract or go out of business and other businesses step into the space. So it may not be, it's a net for the food system, but I think there's some transitioning that's happening within individual businesses, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, makes
Okay.
perfect sense. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Representative Bryce.
Is there an aspect to those working lands grants that it like sustainability of project so as to try to protect for that? Will the project continue on after the year of the grant so that the jobs are maintained or?
Yeah, as far as like the structure of the program, we're looking at, and we review applications from a viewpoint of viability and sustainability. So for example, like the Working Lands program is oversubscribed every year. So this year in the last few years, I don't know if it's on this slide. So there's over $10 million in demand for FY23's $3 million to put out in awards. And that was the same oversubscription in FY22, and we'll see what happens, in FY24. But so we always have way more applications in demand and need than we're able to fund. One of the criteria that we look at is in reviewing applications is their ability to make wise investments of those dollars, have sustainable implementation of the project and of the vision that they're applying for their business. So it could be they're expanding the facility, or they're adding a new product line, or they're needing some new equipment, diversifying their production. So we do ask and look for applications and businesses that are really showing and demonstrating both the financial ability, the structural kind of confidence to be successful long-term. I think there's always that, though, reality that when grant funds are expended and go away, the market shifts and the economy changes and circumstances change for the business. And so we hope that they are stable enough to pivot and adjust, but not always, sadly. I don't know if that answers your question well enough. Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay. And then.
So we can talk more about Working Lands. Our impact report that'll sort of show what FY22 investments were made in is in the final development of printing. And I know Chair Durfee, you spoke with Elizabeth Sipple, who manages that program, last night about figuring out when we may be able to speak just to the Working Lands program with this committee and or with the Senate Ag Committee. So we can go in great detail about the Working Lands program, some today, but also at another time, if that's helpful. The piece that kind of resonates for me is that the program just really continues to be heavily desired, and it's an example of a program that's now recognized within the community of both ag and forestry. And so people wait for the program announcements every year to be able to apply. We did the new ARPA appropriation this year for $1 million, and we received over 7 million in applications. We just made some pre-decisions yesterday of who to invite back for full applications, and it was difficult. And this is probably the hardest year and hardest round of funding that we've ever had, because there were so many high quality applications. Oftentimes, you can like peel off the top best ones and kind of peel off the bottom ones that aren't really the best fit, and then kind of negotiate in the middle, and you can get through that pretty quickly. This was a lot more difficult. There were a lot of very high quality applications demonstrating great need, and we still only have $1 million that we were planning to put out in FY23. And then we're going to put out the second million of that ARPA appropriation next year.
Can you just elaborate on that a little bit? You use the expression great need. Overall, how would you characterize the difference between the demand, $10 million annually, and what you're able to put out, and compare that demand with other years, which I know is also historically exceeded what you were able to fund. But is that large demand a reflection of getting the word out? Just, is it a positive sign or is it a sign of trouble?
It's a great question. I think it's a combination of both. I think there is great name recognition at this point with the Working Lands program. I think businesses are attuned to the funding opportunity. It's talked about, it's well publicized. There's a lot more successful grantees that are talking to one another. So, if you were a forester or a logger that got a grant to do this project, you talk to your friends about the success of that project and the value to your business. And so then they are interested, call our office, they, talk with our team, and many of them are submitting applications. So I think that the reputation of the program is kind of adding to the appeal. I think we're also in a really critical time around agriculture's future. I think the loss of dairy farms that our state has experienced really puts in jeopardy our working landscape and the acres that are committed to agricultural production. And I think businesses are feeling that pressure. We receive, many dairy applications, but also diversified applications or dairy operations that are wanting to diversify, try something different. And Working Lands is often a good fit for that to explore, being that its focus is around innovation and catalytic investment. I also think businesses, as a result of the pandemic, made some interesting changes to how they market their product and what they're looking to do. I think many businesses lost faith in the supply chain. They couldn't get their product to market, or the markets were closed or shelves were empty. And so businesses really took it upon themselves to say, I want to retain as much of that consumer dollar as possible. And so I'm going to do some value-added processing, or I'm going to take on storage of other people's products and develop some direct marketing relationships that I didn't have previously. So I think businesses are also very savvy and very aware of wanting to be profitable and sustainable. And so looking at kind of new business models for their product. So I think we're seeing a lot of that as well.
Representative O'Brien?
Abby, this is a futures question, I guess. Your division, mindful of things like Vermont beer, Vermont specialty cheeses, which are sort of nationally or internationally have done really well. What do you potentially see, given our skill set, given our terroir, given our climate, or what's going to happen to our climate? What are one or two of the potentially next big things we're really teed up for?
Just generally speaking, our state's going to have to increase production of food overall significantly in the coming decade. So when we look at projections of wanting to see Vermont or the Northeast region be more resilient, we are a state that still has the opportunity to grow food. We still have open land that's not committed to development or other land uses at this point. And we have great soils, we grow great grass, we get the right combination of sun and rain. So we're still identified as a real potential production state in the Northeast. So I don't know that I have the perfect answer of what crops people should raise, but I think we just have to remember that we do grow food quite well here. We have the right kind of environment, and we're close to many markets. So our location is pretty uniquely positioned. While Vermont's not a very populated state, we're close to within 5 hours of, millions of consumers in metropolitan markets. And so we're uniquely positioned. And I think we forget that sometime because we are such a rural, small community state, which obviously we love and appreciate that. I do think there's something that's happening around value added. I think people are really looking at, how do we, make cheese, or how do we do other value added dairy products, or how do we do more partnerships. So one recent collaboration has been, what about working with the California walnut kind of growers and Vermont's maple industry? Maple and walnut is a combination that we should be really exploring and looking at closely. So I think some of these opportunities pop up based upon what we're really good at doing. And we certainly have an established dairy industry, and we produce a lot of maple. And while I know everyone's concerned about our climate for maple production, I think we have, many decades ahead of us of still being the leader in maple production. And then I worked and have worked for much of the last 10 years around the produce industry, and am watching that industry really grow. And with year-round production that's happening, starting to see season extension and indoor growing happening, those all feel like real opportunities as well within the fruit and vegetable industry. So that's not a very direct answer, I recognize, but it would be interesting to kind of look at like maybe some of the trend data of where there's real consumer demand for certain products. We've done some of that in dairy and maple. And the feedback that we've received in the recent years is that it's more about how people want to receive their food, not necessarily always what. So they want it in like packaged, ready to eat foods, for example, is something that consumers have been recently interested in. For produce, cut and sliced and peeled, example, to make it easier for meal preparation. So I think those are a lot of the things and the trends that our agency and that our consumers or our producers are paying attention to.
Representative Rice, did you have a hand up?
Yeah, I just wonder if you could just speak to how within the agency you deal with the sort of sometimes competing or needing to be balanced interests of growing for those out of state markets, growing for that sort of Vermont industry aspect versus that real need for local and regional food resiliency and food sovereignty.
Yeah, so the Working Lands program is the one that we've talked about. That's one of our 4 program areas or sections within the Ag Development Division. We also have a market development section. We have the Dairy Business Innovation Center and our marketing and export section. So we can talk about each of those as well, that are really more focused on looking at market opportunity, thinking about new customer bases, and creating new opportunities for businesses to reach new consumers. I would say when I started at the agency in 2011, it felt like more of a conflict. It felt like, you can't support local and do export. Or if you only believe in serving and providing food for your neighbor, that means that you're also not interested in looking at wholesale retail markets in Boston. And I think we've really matured as a sector and probably grown as an agency and really thinking about how you can do both. Some businesses can do both, and some may be interested in doing both. We also have examples of businesses that just want to sell to wholesale. They don't want customers coming to their doorstep. They want to just grow in large volume, have a loading dock, and they ship it to, Whole Foods or a Wegmans or a Hannaford's or whatever, and that relationship works really well for them. There are other growers that have always been committed to saying they want to serve their schools, they want to serve in the cafeterias of their local hospital, and have a farm stand because they really want to make sure that they're providing healthy, nutritious food for their community. And then the combination of both of those market agendas across many farms. And so I think as we have matured and as the industry has grown, our strategy has been to communicate that both have value and merit. And depending upon what goals and quality of life you as a business want, may better position you for a certain market channel than another. If you want to have weekends off and evenings, like probably doing farmers markets and direct marketing may not be for you. But if you only want to crop 2 acres and just want to do it with one other part-time seasonal help, then probably wholesale production on 50 acres of, 20 different crop varieties isn't the best fit for you. So that's been a big growth, I think, in the last 10 to 15 years, is really encouraging businesses to have the business planning conversations, to think about what it is that they're interested in and how they want to operate as a business. And then we can help them better be guided to the right markets and opportunities. I just don't think that at this point we have to say it's one or the other, but instead actually the region needs the food that can be produced by this state, and the people in this state need growers that want to supply and produce to their local community both.
Can I just briefly, is there any data or is it measured anywhere tracking the acres of Vermont ag land that are growing for local markets versus growing for export?
I don't know. We know through the farm to plate plan sales by those different categories of direct markets, restaurants, institutions, wholesale. But I don't know if we know acres.
It's interesting it would be interesting to see in that
Yeah.
format, because we're always talking about how much more land we need to be preserving to grow food for the 30 by 30 regional
Yeah.
goal and always thinking, we've talked about in the past, like all of these pieces that we need land. We need land for forest, we need land for farming, we need land for energy generation, we need land for housing. And so to understand how much land is literally being used to grow for our local regional markets versus for export markets would just be an interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we probably could do an extrapolation. I think it wouldn't be perfect because there's some farms that on that same 2-acre parcel are growing for both markets. And so I don't know that they could, say 1 acre's for local and, 2.5 is for export out of state. But I bet we could probably because we know how many acres are in ag production in Vermont, and we know the percentage of sales in each category, and we could probably, with a few other pieces of data, kind of do an extrapolation to figure that out about like how many acres are we currently using to feed ourselves, which I think is essentially kind of your question. Yeah. Yeah, I wrote it down. I'm curious. I'll connect with our farm to plate partners who are more on the data side than I am and see if they think we could figure that out.
Have the tomorrow morning farm to plate folks are presenting to a joint hearing on last year, and there may be an opportunity. I think it's an interesting question, and it raises the sort of the larger question of, when we talk about feeding ourselves here, good, we're also feeding the rest of the world, and then the rest of the world is helping feed us, and what is sort of the net balance? What does it look like right now, and what would we like it to look like? It's, I think the question of balance there or priorities is a really interesting one.
Mm-hmm.
Go
to the next slide, Alora, which is our marketing and export team. And so this is a photo of the Vermont building at the Big E in West Springfield, where you see kind of all the people going between the booths, and then the relatively recent logo for Maple 100, which is a marketing campaign of encouraging people to attend Maple events, Maple operations, or in local communities in support of the maple industry. So the marketing and export team of the agency's work is really focused on looking at those local, regional, and through to international market opportunities for our food businesses, and really aiming to strengthen the Vermont brand and real opportunity for businesses to grow and access new customers. So at the Big E last year, we had record sales in the building, and all-time kind of attendance record was broken on Vermont Day, which is really big news given that 2 years ago, the Big E was closed for the first time since the war due to COVID. So to kind of bring the customer base back and actually have greater sales and more attendance than in previous years in the building and at the event is really, really exciting. And such a great opportunity for our Vermont businesses that are there, both selling their product, but also marketing Vermont, since a majority of the people that go through the Vermont building and attend the Big E are not from Vermont. So we're reaching a Northeast regional customer base and clientele, not our normal kind of Vermonter population. I think it's about 5% of the Big E attendees are from Vermont, and the rest are from other parts of the country. We've also seen a lot of growth in agritourism. So this concept has actually even been identified as like the fastest growing form of tourism in Vermont, which is these like authentic experiences either on farms or around food or connected to the farm activities, as a way that people are choosing to come to Vermont and want to experience what this lifestyle and quality of living and open space and connection to local food is all about. So lots of activity focused on agritourism. We partner on Open Farm Week. And then again, I mentioned the Maple 100 event, which have both had huge increases. I think there was, twice as many businesses that participated in the Maple 100 promotion in 2022 than in the previous year. What else? I think, some of the future goals that we have for this marketing team work is to just continue our partnership. So that maple and walnut example is just what's an opportunity that comes available. We just did a trade mission in Paris and had staff that were in Spain as well, sort of looking at like new market opportunities for Vermont products. So there's lots of international export interest in Vermont, primarily in dairy and maple and some of our value-added products, but a real opportunity for these new marketing partnerships and collaborations that are even more local as well. There's a Lake Champlain Tasting Trail as an example. So this is a partnership between Quebec, New York, and Vermont about sort of identifying around Lake Champlain all the food and ag-based and restaurant-based businesses within the region. And it's really exciting to be able to partner with another country and with our neighbor to the west to kind of draw people to our region and encourage them to visit Vermont businesses, but also, continue along the trail and go to Quebec and come back through New York and, spend the weekend on the lake. So there's some of those activities that are happening. I think that's all I wanted to say. We do have a capital bill request for the Big E building, so that's another whole conversation and whole presentation that we prepare for kind of more of the money committees, but be happy to share with this committee about sort of what we are imagining for the future of the Vermont building at the Big E and sort of some of the sales data that we get from those businesses and projections for the future. But it's a pretty impressive amount of sales that happen for over the 2-week period at the Big E in our Vermont building, and a great benefit to those 20 to 30 businesses that are there.
What's the Big E?
The Big E,
Is that the
Eastern
expo?
States
Oh.
Exposition is essentially a fair in West Springfield, Massachusetts.
Got it.
So it's this odd arrangement where we own a building in West Springfield, Massachusetts, the state of Vermont does. And we at the Agency of Agriculture operate an event there over 14 days of having vendors sell Vermont product to, hundreds of thousands of visitors.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have no idea what that was.
Shows 5 other states, the other 5 New England states also
That's right.
own buildings, so.
Oh, wow.
It's a New England fair.
Yeah, it's an avenue of the states is where we, each of the New England states own a building. And then, that's surrounded by like the fairgrounds.
Cool. I had no idea.
It's really pretty cool.
This is great. I had no idea.
The Big E is a big deal, yeah. It is fun, actually. Yeah, it's great.
When does it take place?
September.
Field trip.
Yeah, it'd be great. We've actually invited legislators to come down and sort of see the building and stop in, so that would be wonderful.
Thank you, that's been interesting. Abby, one thing that has come up daily in this committee room is agritourism. So I'm curious sort of what aspects of agritourism you allowed that the biggest growth in the agricultural business has been in agritourism. Could you describe some of the top 5 or top several aspects that you have observed that growth?
Yeah, I don't know that I have the data to support the top 5, but I would say
Just a notion.
yeah, so what kind of like my instinct is that people are coming to Vermont, they're staying here in hotels or Airbnbs or even doing farm stays as a way to kind of connect with the Vermont experience. So we have many farms that are putting in housing arrangements for people to come and stay on the farm and have some sort of farming experience. So that could be they help with chores, or their breakfast includes product that's produced and raised on the farm. Whether that's, yogurt and berries, or it's eggs and toast. I mean, I don't know, whatever they kind of are providing for kind of on the food side. But the farm stay piece is pretty significant growth, as well as like the restaurant and event activity. So farms that are having burger nights, or they have music and food, or come and pick up your CSA share, but then also stay, and there's prepared food vendors there, and we have, a musician or, a storyteller or something. So other ways for businesses to kind of again, retain that consumer dollar, but also a real educational opportunity. It's really about getting people to come onto a farm and see how you milk a cow, or see how we, grow food, or we harvest product, or we make something value added. I'm forgetting what we call it, but what's that dairy on a farm day that we do?
Oh, shoot.
I don't know why that's escaping me, but breakfast on a farm. Yes, thank you, Representative Pearl. So this is 1,000 people come to these dairy farms to have a pancake breakfast, and then go to these different stations to learn about what happens on a dairy farm, like how they feed their calves, like how you milk a cow, how you, grow grain, or, make a feed ration for your animals, or what kind of conservation practices that farm is doing. And 1,000 people come. I mean, it's amazing. And they're not all from Vermont, but some of them are. And many of them say they've never seen a calf before, or they've never been on a farm. And so this is all about that agricultural literacy piece, as well as just recognizing that we as Vermonters and our visitors to our state won't continue to respect and appreciate agriculture if they don't understand it. And so ag literacy and agritourism is really about making those connections. So those are probably I don't know that I gave you 5, but those are some of the.
You have a good broad view of, so.
Last summer, at UVM, we hosted the International Workshop on Agritourism, which is the second one that has happened in the world. The first one was in Torino, Italy, and then we hosted it in Burlington last August after being delayed for 2 years because of COVID.
International.
Workshop on agritourism. The acronym was IWA, and it was an amazing, I think it was 40 countries that were here that were interested in learning about agritourism, and, not just about Vermont's experience and our examples, but, examples from all over the world, and certainly across the country. Morning.
Morning. Good morning, Representative Templeton, and thank you for rushing to get here.
Yeah, no worries.
David Templeman.
You got any tar or feathers on the back?
Actually, there are some feathers.
I think I'm going to suggest or ask the committee if it wouldn't mind holding questions to be sure that we give you time, both of you time to finish your presentations, and then at the end we'll.
I think I only have 3 more slides, and I'm happy to go through these quickly and then turn to Glenn, because I hate to take your time. I didn't even know that you pulled it up. That's helpful for me. Thank you. The next slide, Laura, speaks to our market development section. So this is where a lot of the new initiatives and new priorities, new programs, new federal funds come into this section of the division. And so this is where our farm to school and early childcare program is managed out of, our work with farm to institution, which is getting more local food into colleges and healthcare and correctional facilities. This is where the local food purchase assistance program is being managed by, as well as the produce program that we manage, which is primarily focused around produce safety requirements from FDA under the new Food Safety Modernization Act and the produce safety rule. But we also put out grants to help produce businesses make market access improvements and retain, best food safety practices. The USDA Specialty Crop Block Grant Program, another federal program that we briefly touched on, is managed out of this program. We recently just put together some new farmer resources. So I just got actually an email just before coming over here from Michael O'Grady about, a legislator being interested in thinking about how do we demystify and clarify all the different funding sources that are available to farms, which is like so hard to know because there's state grants and federal grants and some at ag and some at nonprofits, and they're all over the place, and it is very confusing. So one of the things that we did, primarily focused on new farmers, was put together a new farmer resources webpage on the agency's website. And we actually prepared a report for the legislature, so for you all to have access to, around coordinating services and resources for new and beginning or aspiring farmers. So really trying to look at like, how do we bring this next generation of new farmers to Vermont, or that are already here that are aspiring farmers, to have access to those resources. So that's a focus. The work on accessory on-farm business and the local definition, which were two policy priorities that we took up over the last couple of years, of really thinking about how do we support farms to diversify, and how do we also retain the value of the Vermont brand through having a local definition. So again, we can go into detail on all of those. I wasn't planning to go into great detail on each of them, but the next slide, the next slide, Alora, talks just very specifically about farm to school. So this is always a granting program that has had a base allocation appropriated by the legislature in our budget every year. To date, we've awarded over 1.6 million in grants, relatively small amount each year, but last year in FY23 was the first year that the base allocation went to $500,000, which has allowed us to double the number of farm to school grants that we were able to put out in this current fiscal year. And that same allocation is in the proposed FY24 budget from the governor's office. And farm to school is always such a fun one. So you'll have a farm to school awareness day here, I think on February 8th in the State House. Is that right? It's always great. It's like, it's all about getting kids to be more aware of where their food comes from, farmers to be able to be engaged in the school community, and making the cafeteria and the classroom really a learning environment around agriculture and healthy eating. And so we put out grants to schools and early childcare facilities and to the technical service providers to make that happen. Last year, we started a new initiative, which is to support community-supported agriculture, or CSA shares, to be purchased from Vermont farms by schools. So again, just building more of those local food and economic development relationship opportunities. So Farm to School is such a good, feel-good program. We'll also have an impact report on that program coming out in the next month. So we'll make sure that you have access to that. The next page was, I just wanted to share briefly on the Specialty Crop Block Grant Program. So this is really federal resources that come through to the state as a block grant, very specifically focused on specialty crops, which meet a particular definition within USDA, but it's mostly fruits and vegetables, tree nuts, nursery crops, floriculture. It also includes honey, hops, maple, and mushrooms. So a lot of the like emerging sectors that we see a lot of potential for growth in are considered specialty crops, and we've invested just over $3.5 million in the last 15 years or so in that program. So small amounts of funds, as I mentioned, because our allocation comes from a national calculation by USDA based on the acres of production of the previous year that we have in specialty crops to give us our annual allocation. But in FY22, we had just over $300,000 that we put out in projects that leveraged another, $162,000. So small, but impactful to that sector that often feels overlooked and under-resourced and not a priority because they're not our, primary commodity crops. Maybe the next page, Alora, if you wouldn't mind. So the next two are on the Dairy Business Innovation Center. So this is sort of that new initiative that I mentioned of funding that came to the agency. So over $38 million to support this initiative of an 11-state region. All federal resources. And to date, we've put out $8 million in 145 awards across the Northeast, across the 11-state region. It's not just the Northeast. No, it's not just New England, it's across the Northeast, excuse me. And in the next month, we're going to put out another 13 million of funding opportunities. And that's what those 3 billets are, really focused on dairy processing, research and development. So, a good share of the money stays in Vermont and goes to Vermont dairy industry, but it also goes to the other 10 states in the region. And our Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center is joined by 3 other centers across the country. So we're one of 4 centers in the US. And this is that new initiative that'll run through with current funding through 2026. And it's not just cow, it's focused on sheep and goat. It's not just fluid milk, it's also focused on value added and processing. So real opportunity, a lot of demand for this program. It's unbelievable. I think the last round, and maybe we can go to the next and final slide, Laura, and I think this speaks to some of the demand. Oh, is that the last one? Okay, great. So I think I just had that then in my notes. We did the last round was for looking at on-farm milk handling and storage, and there was over 7.8 million in requests, and we awarded just over $1 million. So there's so much demand and design for support for innovation in the dairy sector that it's just, it's amazing, the number of applications that team and that center is receiving across all 11 states.
Is that center physically located here in Montpelier?
At the Agency of Agriculture, yes. So it's, it's within the confines of our agency, it more in a virtual sense. Actually, the whole team is here in Montpelier today. But yeah, so the center is housed at the agency, hosted here in Vermont, but serves all 11 states.
Yeah, great.
Sorry to be so long-winded. I didn't mean to take more than my time.
Yeah, I think we share in the, not blame, but in the length of the conversation. Are there other questions before we move on to Glenn about the division's work? Well, thank you for that overview.
Welcome. Yeah, thanks for your interest.
Yeah, very, very helpful, very thorough. And
sorry, Glenn,
No,
took your time.
Don't be sorry at all. I learned some things too, so it was very helpful.
so we've got a different presentation, but if the committee wants to pull it up, and I think Laura's ahead of us.
Yeah, so great. So thanks again for your time, representatives. So I just wanted to share a little bit of an introduction to the Vermont Agriculture and Environmental Laboratory. So I've got 2 slides here, but just again, want to kind of paint the picture of what it is we do and the sort of activities that happen. So we're fortunate to have a fairly new facility. It was commissioned back in 2019, located on the VTC campus in Randolph Center. And when we think about the laboratory, we can think about it in 2 ways. In one sense, it's a facility that supports a lot of collaborative projects. And so those projects include our analytical labs. So these various sections that are doing all sorts of analytical testing, as well as a lot of related department or sections that are represented in that same facility or space. And so this includes things such as weights and measures. It includes our animal health laboratory spaces. It includes plant health and pest management. It also includes some collaborative spaces with the Agency of Natural Resources. So we work with them, particularly the Department of Environmental Conservation, with watershed monitoring, fish and wildlife, and a host of other interrelated activities. So in many cases, our lab is trying to service both the testing and analytical needs that the Agency of Natural Resources has, in addition to the Agency of Agriculture. So just by the numbers, a little bit of some of the things that happen at the lab. So every year we go through around 30,000 analytical tests. So we offer over 100 unique tests at the lab, and we pride ourselves in providing data that's actionable. And so we're a nationally accredited lab. We have a very strict quality assurance process, which is an extremely onerous process, but very rewarding in the sense that the data that comes out of the lab is something that you can stand behind. And so when agencies are considering actions, when the state is considering actions, this data informs those actions. And so just a few examples of some of the activities, some of the testing activities that we do at the lab. So with milk and dairy products, we do milk quality testing. We do antibiotics, bacteria, pasteurization. On a week-to-week basis, we're taking in a subset of dairy samples that are produced throughout the state and sold throughout the state, and testing those and then providing that data back to inform action if necessary. This past summer, we took on testing responsibilities for cyanotoxins. So I know most of you are probably aware of blue-green algae and some of the challenges that can have with drinking water as well as recreational waters. So we took on testing responsibilities for that and will continue to do so in the coming season. We do a number of sampling or testing for feed, seed, fertilizer, and pet food. And again, this is largely through consumer quality assurance and label guarantees. So products that are being sold and distributed in the state, the lab is essentially that third party that's going to review and make sure that the fertilizer has the appropriate nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, et cetera, that the label says it does. For pet food, it has to do with fiber and fats. But again, looking to make sure that the consumer is getting what they're paying for. From a pesticide standpoint, we have a very robust organic laboratory section. So there we're charged with routine analysis of pesticides, so such as neonicotinoids or glyphosate, but also looking at enforcement cases. And so in this case, when there's a complaint that's raised up to the agency, we respond, we provide a chain of custody response and data that can either inform that complaint is valid or invalidated. So we have a very defensible process for that. With water quality, we handle tens of thousands of samples that come to us throughout virtually every body of water in Vermont state, looking at water quality monitoring and the health of our bodies of water over time. So things such as phosphorus or salt runoff. So we handle those throughout the year. Our various lab sections, again, are looking at nutrients, metals. We look for pesticides, bacteria, but again, providing information that informs action and gives us sort of a thumbprint on where we are from a quality standpoint. Similarly, we get involved with air quality work. So the state has, through the EPA, a number of sites that are set up to monitor air quality and to monitor for heavy metals. And so thankfully, Vermont State has some of the cleanest air in the nation, but those samples come to us every 12 days for year-round analysis of air quality. So a couple areas you may have heard about that we're actively engaged in that are sort of new edge testing for us at the lab. One of those is PCBs in air. So you may be aware of a mandate for Vermont State schools to be tested for the presence of PCBs in air, and that's a fairly comprehensive project that will take place over a couple of years. And so the lab's getting involved, as well as some other private labs, to try and provide the data that's necessary to, again, inform whether the air quality is safe in our schools and then inform potential responses. Similar, PFAS, I'm sure, is something you've all kind of registered on your radar as something that's now unfortunately seems to be ubiquitous in our soil and our water and our food. And having the ability to test for the presence of that at very incredibly small concentrations is important. So the laboratory, thanks to some investments that were made in the last fiscal year, is on the cusp of starting that testing and that analysis. So we've hired a chemist and we've obtained the instrumentation necessary to jumpstart a PFAS analysis process at the lab. And so we're hopeful in this current calendar year that we'll kick that off in earnest. But so that's kind of in a nutshell. We've got 14 folks work full-time in our analytical labs. We've got a great team. I'm really proud of the data that comes out of the lab.
The lab is newish.
Yeah, so the lab has been around for a long time, but we've changed places over the years. The facility, yes. And so our facility now, thankfully, is quite a nice facility. You may see in our capital ask that our Achilles heel, so to speak, is our steam and providing adequate steam throughout the year. But other than that, we've got a great facility. It's a safe and very functional place to work.
Questions, Representative Rice?
Is there a process laid out yet for what testing agricultural soils for PFAS might look like?
That's a great question, Representative. I don't have the answer for that. I know there's a lot of things that are being discussed. Right now, I'm in contact with probably 40 different individuals within the state who have some affiliation with PFAS analysis, whether it's the Agency of Transportation, whether it's the Agency of Agriculture or Natural Resources, but it is widespread, the concern. And I think agricultural soils is one of those areas that would likely qualify for additional testing. Our public water supplies are another key area right now.
Are you coordinating or in conversation with folks outside of the state too? Like, does the agency communicate with folks in Maine about agricultural?
That's a great question. Yeah, so we're kind of, I guess, and again, the lab is sort of the intermediary, right? Our goal is to provide the data that informs a broad spectrum of programs. So those programs I know are in active conversations with Maine and others in terms of some of the testing mandates that state has come up with and seeing how that's working. So, I'm hopeful that, where we're going is we want to have informed data that is actionable and representative, but not to create, undue unrest.
Representative Templin?
So in a situation a few years ago where I had some water samples tested, I know your department doesn't do that, but I received positive results on nuclear isotopes in my water to a pretty high degree, actually. And I inquired with the lab if when they discover such a thing, do they communicate with neighbors in my area and let them know? I'm wondering if you have any follow-up with neighboring properties, if, for example, you found.
Yeah, that's a great question, Representative. So I think in that case, your water sample would have went to the Vermont Public Health Lab.
Indeed.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so I think in that case, that data that I think there is a Vermont process that basically it is centralized and it is a notification-based data system. So not only you are receiving the results, but also it's going into a central database. How that data is taken from there, I can't answer. But I would, I'd like to think like you said, that would maybe inform others in your area that
you would hope
you would want to, sample your well.
Yeah, but you don't know specifically if that data is then distributed to the public.
You're asking specifically
Yeah.
about the data that would be for PFAS.
For PFAS and the PCBs.
And PCPs.
Yeah.
Right. So I think in those cases, again, the data goes back to the agencies, to the various programs. So in this case, it's the Agency of Natural Resources.
Right.
That's leading the PFAS in schools testing program. So they would take that data, they centralize it, and then they inform. So the schools have to respond to that. And so it becomes a public report at that point.
Schools in that particular case, but I'm speaking about maybe non-institutional, like for example, my farm borders another farm. If you came up with a positive PFA result, would the other farm be informed?
So there, I can't answer that.
Okay,
It's
fair
too
enough.
early.
Fair
to
enough.
say anything about
Okay, thank you.
Senator O'Brien?
Are you testing for hemp and cannabis?
Yes and no. So we have been doing testing for hemp specifically, mostly for enforcement and making sure that it's truly hemp. However, with the start of the Cannabis Control Board, those responsibilities have shifted from the agency to the Cannabis Control Board. And so at that point, it's much likely that we'll have very few samples coming to the lab. At this point, our priorities, while we would love to take on, some additional testing responsibilities, our priorities are at this point really focused on growing the PCB and the PFAS testing capabilities.
Other questions?
We went on a field trip last year there.
The committee did?
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
Good.
It is a beautiful building, I think.
We have a new committee, so maybe we should.
that'd be fun.
Yeah, always welcome to host you. So hesitate to let me know.
Well, thank you. If there aren't any other questions, then we'll let you get back to Randolph and back to work.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great to see you all.
Thanks for coming.
You're welcome.
Thanks for your time today.
Have us in
Sorry
anytime.
I'm late.
That's okay.
Yeah, don't be sorry.
I'm Abby Willard.
I'm David Temple.
Nice to meet you, Representative.
And wrap up for the morning, and we'll be back at 1 for continued discussion on school meals, and we've got members of the School Nutrition Association will be